Is this the place that we act out the ego to evolve? Is this earth plane acting out the ego to evolve into the next plane, or is that what you're...
Or is it possible for this earth to be the spiritual, the love, the harmony, or is it the lunatic asylum that you described?
That is like spraying oil on the fire to put it out. Acting out ego just makes it larger and larger and more intense in your system. You cannot give it, as I say, 1 second's life, not letting it hang on to your consciousness or your way of behaving for 1 second. If you feel it coming up, crush it straight away.
And is it possible to live your life like that in the world as it is today and carry out all of the functions that we have to do on a day-to-day basis? I can see that when you're in a situation like this, or when you're meditating, you can lose the ego. But is it possible to act out your whole life and all of your interactions?
Absolutely. Ramana Maharshi is a perfect example of this. At the age of 16, he lost his sense of ego. He was a normal, rumbustious schoolboy. He enjoyed having scraps. He beat up people, the other boys. He wanted to be the best at swimming and cricket and all that. And suddenly one day, he lay down in his uncle's house in Madurai, and something came over him that he realized he was going to die. And he went into a rigor mortis like state. And he said, now my body is going to be taken to the burning ground, but with the death of the body, am I dead? And he suddenly realized that he was the deathless spirit, and there was no way it was possible for him to die. The body could drop off for all he cared, but he was never going to die. And at that moment, he lost all fear, he lost all sense of ego, he became completely changed, and he lost all interest in his school books. He just sat there staring into space when he had to do his homework. And it wasn't until an uncle came by and he said, where have you come from? He said, I've come from Arunachala. And this word, Arunachala, did something in his consciousness, awakened him. He thought that was some kind of Shangri-La, a place that didn't exist. And when he realized it was a place he could go to, that made him leave his home. He left school, he left his house without telling anybody, and he set off for Tiruvannamalai and this Arunachala mountain, which has attracted realized sages for thousands upon thousands of years. It is perhaps the oldest mountain on the planet. It was there before the Himalayas came up, when India was still an island continent. When Lemuria went down, there was a tectonic plate shift, and India shot up and hit the area of Mongolia and Nepal, and up came the Himalayas. But the fossils on Arunachala showed that it was there long, long before the Himalayas came up. And so he stayed there in caves and in temples for the rest of his life. And for about 16 years he didn't speak at all. He was just so full of God consciousness that he didn't feel the need to speak. He didn't bother about food. His nails grew long, his hair grew long, he didn't have any clothes. And sages came from all over India just to sit in his radiance. And it wasn't until one sage came and implored him to answer a question that he suddenly started to speak and teach. And he just understood all the scriptures that he'd never read. When great intellectuals came to him to explain something, he explained perfectly because he was living the experience. And he is revered by every sage, every ashram in India. You'll see his portrait because he had achieved total spiritual enlightenment, whereas most of the other gurus only achieve intellectual enlightenment. And there's a big difference. There are mighty speakers, but who still have multiple personality problems. And if you lived close to them, you know that they've got all these problems and quirks and vanities and still ego sense. But Ramana was the only one who achieved total spiritual enlightenment for about the last 2,000 years. Shivananda said every person must come to the state of Ramana Maharshi in the end. Aurobindo said something of the same, and many other sages revered Ramana because he was there. What happens is when Kundalini hits Sahasrara, you become intellectually illumined, and then you know lots of things and you can explain it perfectly well. But there is a secret nadi which comes from Sahasrara down into the heart center, and this is called Amrita Nadi, the nadi of nectar. And only when it descends from Sahasrara, the Kundalini, into the heart center, do you become spiritually emancipated. And it's very rare that this happens.